Hey everyone, this is Brianna Wade, the Volunteer and Staff Development Program Associate for Arkansas 4-H. And we've got a video today that we're going to be talking about reporting child abuse and neglect and processing the Arkansas mandated reporter reports. So this is one that's really important to understand and get a hold of. Now, when you're a 4-H volunteer, you may have already been through this training or you will be doing this training before you can start volunteering. But this just goes over an overall account of what that looks like, what that can look like, and how that process is done. All right, so before we start jumping into how do you report and all that good stuff, we're going to go over a couple things, including some important terminology here. So there's a few different things that we consider when reporting potential child abuse and or um, sorry about that. Okay, so there's a few things to keep in mind when reporting child abuse and neglect. So there's a few different terminology pieces that we're going to look at. Um, Hey everyone, this is Brianna Wade, the Volunteer and Staff Development Program Associate for Arkansas 4-H. And today we're going to be learning a little bit about the Arkansas Mandated Reporter reporting process and a little bit about child abuse and neglect, as well as some things that we can go over before we potentially report. All right, so as a volunteer, oh, hi, everyone. This is Brianna Wade, the Volunteer and Staff Development Program Associate for Arkansas 4-H. And today we're going to be talking about the Arkansas Mandated Reporter. Um, hey, everyone. This is Brianna Wade with Arkansas 4-H. And today we're going to be talking a little bit about the Arkansas Mandated Reporter process and a few things to keep in mind when dealing with child abuse and neglect. All right, so let's go ahead and get started. Before we jump into the process of how to report, it's really important to have some information on the terminology and what these things encompass when reporting. So, our first term is abandonment. So, it's described as a failure to provide reasonable support, allowing conditions to continue for an indefinite period, and failure to maintain contact with the child. So, with each of these definitions, there is a full document explaining into detail the specifics of this. These are just the highlights. So, please make sure to review the document that is linked at the end of this video to get a more accurate and in-depth description. So, that's abandonment. So, abuse is a determined harm to a child. And there's a very long list of what these things um, are considered as abuse in that document as well. A child is a person under the age of 18. Child maltreatment is considered abuse, sexual abuse, neglect, sexual exploitation, and or abandonment. And grooming is knowingly disseminating to a child 13 years or under sexual content with the purpose of grooming the child to engage in sexual activities. All right, next, Imminent harm is an act of harm or danger to the health of a child and is constrained by time and may be prevented by immediate intervention by a court. So this would be something that you would report if you think that youth needs to be removed from that situation with fear for their safety immediately. Neglect, again, there's a long list of what this actually means in detail on that document, but as a summary, it's the failure to failure to prevent, that's supposed to say prevent, failure to prevent abuse, provide required needs such as food, clothing, housing, etc., failure to protect from abandonment and abuse, failure to provide medical attention, failure to assume responsibility for a child, and the lack of supervision. Sexual abuse is described as the force of sexual activity, indecent exposure, forcing the watching of pornography, voyeurism, persons over the age of 18 to persons younger than 18 years old, and sexual exploitation, which includes prostitution, obscene photography, and or filming. So what is a mandated reporter? So there is a long list of folks who are required as mandatory reporters to report abuse. Again, I want to keep referencing back to that document. It has the full list of who that umbrella covers. But as a 4-H volunteer, before you can be approved as a volunteer, one of the requirements is that you complete the Arkansas mandated reporter training. You cannot be an Arkansas 4-H volunteer without doing this training along with other qualifications. This means that you have a responsibility to report suspected abuse. So, what does that actually look like? So, when do I report? So, you report when you have reasonable cause to suspect the following: that a child has been a subject to child maltreatment, has died as a result of child maltreatment, has died suddenly and unexpectedly, or observes a child being subject to conditions or circumstances that would reasonably result in child maltreatment. What is the timeline of that? You must report immediately. You do not have to wait for a due process. You report as soon as you suspect, not when you have proof. So one thing to keep in mind when you are reporting is that you should not be doing any investigating. If you suspect the abuse, report the abuse. Do not interrogate or ask follow-up questions with the folks that you suspect abuse, and report everything that you hear if a other person reports directly to you or discloses that they or someone else they know have been abused. By asking intensive questions or quote unquote interrogating those who maybe have experienced this abuse, or for those who were made aware, it can be really difficult for them once they are interviewed or um, spoke to from the different agencies, and can be very frustrating. So it's very important that you report what you know and allow the agencies to do their job. All right. So a few guidelines to keep in mind for mandated reporting is: one, no one can prevent you from reporting, whether it be your employer, your supervisor, or anyone else. You cannot be told by anyone that you cannot report, including folks who may be aware of the abuse, the abusers, anyone else. You have free will, and it's 100% available for you to report at any time. But keep in mind that you must immediately report when you suspect abuse or neglect. Again, you do not have to have permission. So when you suspect abuse, especially as a 4-H volunteer, please keep in mind that you do not have to have the permission of co-leaders, of your 4-H professional, of anyone else in that role. When you see or suspect abuse, report it immediately without requesting um, permission. And right here it says you do not have to notify anyone if you report. So if you report suspected abuse, for example, in your 4-H club, you do not have to notify any guardians, any co-leaders, your 4-H agent. That is kept to you and the person that you reported the incident to or the abuse to. So one thing to keep in mind that's a little bit different than previously is that you were not anonymous to the hotline. So previously, you could leave anonymous tips or reports. That is no longer the case. So um, they want to make sure that they can reach back out to you if they have questions or concerns. But the catcher is you are always anonymous to anyone else. So, although the hotline will know who you are and have your contact information in case if they need a follow up, the hotline will never notify someone else that you were the one that reported them. So, in any case, you are anonymous to everyone except for the hotline. Something very important to keep in mind, and as a 4-H volunteer, we would assume that you would report potential child abuse and neglect because it's your responsibility and because you care about youth and their safety. But a few things to keep in mind um, with this is that refusal or failure to report can be very risky and dangerous, not only to the youth, but it can lead to legal action for yourself. So, a mandated reporter who knowingly fails to notify the child abuse hotline of child maltreatment or suspected child maltreatment will be committing a Class A misdemeanor. A mandated reporter who recklessly fails to notify the child abuse hotline of child maltreatment or suspected child maltreatment commits a Class C misdemeanor. And a mandated reporter who purposefully fails to notify the child abuse hotline of child maltreatment is civilly liable for damages proximately caused by such failure. So not only can this damage the youth themselves, but you are open for legal action. But keep in mind, a publicly supported school, facility, or institution, which is you, acting in good faith by cooperating with the investigative agency and who reports in good faith, shall be immune from civil and criminal liability. So if you're making this report out of good faith, you are protected. Next, how do you report? So you actually have two options for reporting as a 4-H volunteer. So the first one is to call the hotline at 1-800-482-5964, or yes, 5964. And there's also the option of doing an online report as well. Because you completed the Arkansas mandated reporter training, you have an account set up. So if you prefer to do an online submission, you can visit mandatedreporter.arkansas.gov. And when you're filling out a report, you should make sure to include all the details, even if they seem small or unimportant to the investigation. So everything that you can think of to where we equip the investigators with the information they need to succeed. So, what can you expect when doing a report for child abuse or neglect? So this is what the form will look like, and this may be some of the questions that they ask you if you do a report over the phone. So you will need to know a little about the victim as much as possible. So if you don't know their date of birth, you can do their approximate age. And if you don't know where they live, you can give a um, estimate as good as you can. You may not know all this information, but if you give as much information as possible, that can be very helpful. Again, you do not have to notify your 4-H professional, but you can request some of this information be pulled from our enrollment system if you are a leader of a club that the a child is in. And then you're going to fill out as much as you can on that page 2 for demographic roles. And then page 3. So it may take more than one page to fill this out, but this is where you're going to put your narrative and what the situation is. Again, please make sure to involve anything that you possibly can dealing with this youth, which includes visuals, if there's been signs of abuse, if that youth is telling you, if you've noticed things over a period of time, but you're not sure and you are realizing that it may be signs of abuse. And also make sure to include in here if the youth is in imminent danger. So if you think that that youth is in danger and must be removed immediately, make sure to put that in the report. Now, of course, when we report potential child abuse and neglect, we want all children to be pulled from that situation as soon as possible. But do understand that depending on the severity of the case, they may or may not be able to be pulled from that situation at the time. All right, so now that you've reported, what happens? So it can seem sometimes like it might be a little overwhelming. You report and then you don't know what's going to happen next. You don't know what the next steps are. You may be nervous about being contacted again, but this is really the process of what happens after you report. And for more information on that, I'm pulling this information from Human Services. So their website is humanservices.arkansas.gov. And this is going to tell you the similar process. So when you've done this report, if there's enough information in the report, it will be sent to either DCFS or CACD to be investigated. So they've got specific highly trained investigators who will visit with everyone involved with the report. So that would include guardians, the youth themselves, anyone that may have witnessed if there was anything that happened in a public space. And they're going to look at the safety of the youth. So that means if they feel like the youth is in imminent danger, they will remove that youth from the situation. So this may mean that you are called after you report to talk through the situation with the investigator. For the most part, that doesn't mean that they are doubting you. They want to make sure that they have what you reported or wrote down as accurate as possible, because there may be some things that you assume that they know that they're unaware of. So the investigator is also going to put services and supports in place for the needs if applicable. So when you're thinking about possible abandonment or neglect, if that child is in need of food or housing, things like that, this is where the investigator would put those resources in place. So that investigator is going to decide on if the report is a true case of abuse or neglect or if it's untrue. So this does not mean true and false as in you're telling a lie or not. This is once they investigate, can this be considered abuse in one of the topics that we covered earlier, or is it just concerning and something that they keep an eye on? So another thing to keep in mind is when you make a report, another reason why it's so important is that it keeps a record. So if you reported something and they said, well, it's not really a true case of abuse, but then later on down the road, it's happening again, they have a record of what happened so that they can understand a little bit more carefully of this may be a true case now of abuse compared to before, and it helps their case when there's plenty of data and information given. So again, it's your responsibility and your obligation to report, but it also helps create a documentation of timelines if needed for future cases of reported abuse or neglect. So if there's a true case, which means there is signs of abuse, DCFS is going to work on the case and protect the youth. So that means that they are going to provide services needed like before. So that means if they have to separate the youth from their direct authority, so if they have a guardian or someone that they live with, or if they're living with their abuser, they would pull them out of that situation. Again, food, clothes, resources, and that includes court action if needed. So if they need to suspend and put someone in as their guardian, a temporary guardianship, that's where that would happen as well. So if the report is not a true case of abuse, meaning they don't see enough evidence for abuse happening for them to take action, the case is going to be closed. And so, again, if you continue to see signs or suspicion of abuse, you do the same thing over again. You report it. And they do a very thorough job. So if you have any questions about that, you can always reach out to inquire about the process of that and what that looks like. So a few of those resources, like I said earlier, I pulled the details on the process and the information on how to report from humanservices.arkansas.gov. And the organization RAIN put out this policy, and this is from 2023, but that's where you're going to find all the descriptions of what abuse is, the different types of abuse, the different types of mandated reporters, and what that looks like for you. So if you have questions on reporting, they do have a DHS chat box. So if you are thinking about, well, what is this? Does this require reporting, or I'm a little confused on this? It's always better safe than sorry to go ahead and report. But if you have specific questions, you can go to the Human Services website, and on their child abuse and neglect page with Children and Family Services, they have a DHS chat box on the bottom right of the screen, and you can click on that and have communications with them. And I recommend doing this because if that's the case, you do not have to ask somebody for information and it not expose, but make them aware that you're considering submitting in a report. So if you're a 4-H club leader or volunteer in any capacity, you do not have to inquire with your 4-H professional. But if you're comfortable and you do have questions for them, you can reach out. But you can do all of these questionings and asking and inquirings directly to DHS and their chat box, as well as the hotline. So if you have questions about that as well, you can call the hotline and ask those questions. That way they can assist you and inform you on what the best course of action is. So if you have any other questions about things of this nature, I'm happy to help you out. My email is bwade@uada.edu. And if you are ever concerned, again, report. You'll never regret reporting. And it's important that we make sure that we protect our youth, because this is at the forefront of what we do as volunteers and as 4-H program leaders and club programs and all of our stuff. Like, this is the very most important thing, that we keep our youth safe. So if you have any questions, comments, concerns, Please let somebody know. If it's not the hotline, it can be your 4-H professional. And if it's not your 4-H professional, it can be me. But feel free to reach out. If you need any of these resources sent to you directly, feel free to reach out and I can send that to you. The website's there, and I'll also post it in the caption. So, anyway, y'all have a great day and happy programming.